Well, well, well. Am I live? Who knows? We'll find out. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Are you regretting it? I hope so. Give me a second, and then I can actually read the chat. I hope so. Here we go. Okay, I can hear myself. That's good. Hey, Thornall, how are you doing? Welcome. Hey, Demidrack, how are you doing? All right, let's get this started. Well, cheers and all that. How you guys doing? Yeah, I kind of realized earlier today that like this is officially like the last Saturday of the month, so I should do the monthly live stream, and then I um didn't do anything for the rest of the day because the last 2 days have been a bit rough. Because on Thursday evening I went to like a punk rock concert, which was like really good. Don't get me wrong, like it was amazing. It was more like bands I started listening to when I was like 12 or 13 years old. So seeing them live is very emotional. And then, well, a friend stayed here for like the last 2 nights, slept on my couch, and we had like basically we've been day drinking for the last 2 days, and that is not helpful when it comes to organizing stuff, in general, I guess. Hey Ori, how you doing? Right before the stream, I listened to my favorite punk rock band from Haifa, which, well, to be fair, I only know one, and they're really good. But yeah. So, an older Useless ID album was what I was listening to right until like 10 minutes ago. I like the Halloween thing is so fascinating to me because it's such like an American kind of thing via being like a Celtic kind of thing, but like more like an imagined Celtic kind of thing. And I did not like Germany did not have like Halloween until like I don't know 10 years ago, which is when kids started doing like trick or treating or whatever. But until then, it never was like a thing. I'm like, well, it's we have fucking like Erntedank, which is Thanksgiving, I guess, but different. Which is where you gather like lots of like harvest stuff and bring it to church or whatever, and you can combine that with like Saint Michael's and killing dragons and shit, which is cool. But it's a very different kind of thing from like Halloween. Hey Jeroen, how you doing? I feel like what's so interesting about like Halloween is that like you can historically sort of like more or less not prove, but like there's a strong argument to be made about like how Halloween is something that like folklorists kind of invented in like the early 1800s, when British folklorists started talking to people in Ireland and like Celtic people in general, and decided to sort of like create stuff. And Halloween and well, Halloween not so much, but like Samhain and stuff like that kind of Samhain comes from that, and Halloween is sort of like tied to that. Like, I mean, to be fair, not Halloween, but the day after, like All Hallows, is an official holiday in Germany, like a public holiday, because very very we might separate church and state in some regards, but like religious, like Christian holidays are a big deal around here. So yeah, All Hallows is like the 31st is very much or it's like the 1st of November. That's the 1st of November is All Hallows, yeah. And the week after is All Souls. But yeah, so we have that, but like Halloween never been like a big deal. I don't need an excuse to read horror. So like Halloween is the eve before All Hallows, and All Hallows is the day of all I guess technically Hallows means in this case means people that have All Saints basically. And you kind of mix that with like the idea of like a Day of the Dead. And that's sort of like where it gets interesting, because as far as I know, and I might be wrong there, because I'm not an actual fully studied folklorist or anything of the sorts, but as far as I know, a lot of the idea has been sort of like constructed around that, and that's like when it comes to like a lot of like sort of like pagan, pseudo pagan kind of holidays, kind of things, is that a lot of it is very much like construction that happened later on compared to like actual pagan traditions, because yeah, in Europe at least you don't have those. That stuff was like so thoroughly stamped out that like a lot of it's like more like a newer sort of like reconstruction and construction in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean Halloween just means All Hallows Eve, and All Hallows is a Catholic holiday. That is true. We do have Walpurgisnacht on, which is fun. It's also much earlier. I mean, it's the last night of April is Walpurgisnacht, which is sort of like another sort of like construction of like a witches' Sabbath kind of thing, where you have all kind of weirdness happening, and usually everyone going like, you know, in theory, going up to Brocken in the Harz Mountains and doing, I guess, naked dancing and broomstick riding, and we will not talk about what witches' grease means in connection to broomsticks in this situation, but yeah, we do have that. Um, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, Liam, by the way, I think, like, I don't know how many of you have read the Night Battles by Carlo Ginzburg, which I highly recommend. It's a really good book. It's kind of going too far. And it's sort of like it's very open to sort of like very generalized things that Ginsberg has been trying to sort of like walk back ever since. But it's a really good book. I highly recommend it. It's microhistory. It's about the cult of the Benandanti in the Friuli, which is well, north. Let me look at the map. I guess northeastern Italy, like close to Austria, basically. And he's basically looking at like a bunch of mostly records from the like Inquisition records, basically, when they're talking to people that claim to be Benandanti, and then trying to sort of like fit a specific sort of like local belief into a generalized framework of heresy and witchcraft and stuff. But it's also just like really cool, and it shows up in Guy Gabriel Kay's Tigana, for example, because it is just like the Benandanti idea of like on the Ember days, Benandanti leave their bodies and their souls go to this place, and then they fight the evil witches, and to make sure that the harvest will be good next time round, and it's really cool. And it kind of ties to the whole like Valpurga, and this idea of like having specific sort of like general like fertility cults kind of thing. I mean, he's a bit too optimistic during that first book compared to like later stuff, when he tries to make sure that he's not, it's not like the witch cult in Western Europe. It's not Margaret Murray kind of thing, but he's a bit too optimistic in the first in the Night Battles. But I highly recommend reading that if you're into like weird shit. But yeah, so I think like a lot of the sort of like ideas of like how witchcraft connects to other stuff is tied to that, because Ginsberg being, one of the inventors, or not inventors, but like originators of what you might call microhistory, and certainly like probably one of the most influential like historians of the 20th century in that regard, has certainly, you know, made that whole discussion about like witchcraft, tying witchcraft to like old like pre-Christian pagan cults, made it easier to actually argue make that argument, even though it's still kind of tenuous in a lot of ways, I think. Yeah, Liam, that's a very good question. But that's the thing. Like, have you read the Ginsburg thing? Have you read the Night Battles? Because I think you might generally like appreciate what he's doing, because it is it, the night the general like sort of idea of like microhistories, like looking at like one very specific sort of like thing and going in detail through inquisitional records and stuff, and looking at like how over like a very like short time frame, sort of like the understanding of a specific local thing changed because of the way that the Inquisition tried to fit something into its framework of like heresy and stuff. And it's, in that regard, it's a generally really really good like study that certainly set sort of like the framework for like a lot of like historiography that came afterwards. And for that alone, I think it's worth reading. um, I think. Hey Ida, how you doing? Yeah, Liam, it definitely is intriguing. I think you might really enjoy what he's doing there. I mean, it's from like the 60s, and I think the English translation is like early 80s, I think. So it's been around for a long time, and he's done like all kinds of other stuff since then. I feel like probably the most famous one is the Worms and the Cheese, which is also like a really interesting, because Ginsberg is doing like microhistory stuff all the time. So the Worms and the Cheese is about this Italian miller in the 16th, I think, 16th century, who got, you know, accused of heresy, and he's looking at like his writing. So the guy, was able to write down. He wrote like his idea of like how the universe functions, which is, that creation and the earth kind of functions like a cheese, and there's like worms, you know, growing in that cheese in the earth, like worms grow in cheese. This is 16th century, right? Um, and that's sort of like how life started on the earth, and it's a really interesting book in that you can sort of like see people trying to make sense of the universe and of the world outside of like a generally sort of like organized and unified sort of like academic understanding of the world, and that's kind of the kind of thing that like Ginsberg is really good at. Oh, The Bewitching. I have not heard about that one, Jerome. I'm going to read The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating next. That's sort of like my plan for tomorrow, I think. It's a relatively short book. It's like 150 pages, something like that. So yeah, it's a go for tomorrow. And after that, something, I guess. Yeah, school has started here like last week, I think. So like school's on for like a week now, which I only know because like when I go to the gym in the morning, it's like lots of school kids getting out of the same stop where I have to get out of the bus to go to the gym because the school is next door, and they're getting on my nerves. Um. Okay, that sounds interesting, Jeroen. I'm gonna check that one out. Um, the thing, Thornall, with like the Glenn Cook stuff is that like I need to figure out which one I meant. Because yeah, the thing with like the Glenn Cook stuff is that like Glenn Cook has all these like amazing titles that all sound the same. So I'm kind of confused which one I said then. It might have been A Shadow of All Night Falling, which is the first part of the Dread Empire series. And that's a solid one. It's like a very, very traditional fantasy book compared to like Black Company. So yeah, I think it might have been a Shadow of No All Night Falling, and that is the first part of the Dread Empire series, which goes weird places because it does have sort of like it's a fantasy version of like the start of Islam in a lot of ways, I think. But A Shadow of All Night Falling is sort of like a prequel kind of thing to that because it takes a while for the whole like the actual thing to happen, I think. But it's like been years since I read those. Hey KL, how you doing? But like yeah, the Dread Empire stuff is like far more sort of like standard fantasy in that you have your Vikings that have like long hair and big axes and beards and shit, and you have deserts where people are doing desert stuff and you know that kind of thing. But as far as I know, no no non-human intelligent beings. But I never finished that series. I kind of get bogged down at some point. I still need to finish that one. It does not have a Dark Lord. It's not that kind of story. It doesn't have like a Dark Lord in any meaningful way. But I understand what you mean. Let me think. What has like? I mean, obviously, Black Company does have well, not the Dark Lord, but a Dark Lady, which is at least as cool. But yeah, I'm sorry you're not well, Kale. Like seriously, I'm very sorry about that. Uh, I think like I know what you mean. Like when it comes to sort of like a specific sort of like form of fantasy that has like the Dark Lord, like a very clear structure of like you're gonna fight that one guy and you kill that one guy and then things will be all right. And there is something I guess cathartic about it because in reality we that's not how the world works, but it feels good to have that kind of story from time to time. I think the danger is to kind of get bogged down, sort of like get trapped into thinking that that is actually how the world works. But I personally enjoy reading those kind of stories from time to time because yeah, it gives me that like at least for a moment that relief of going like, hey, maybe sometimes it's actually just the Dark Lord that we need to actually get rid of and not just change all of reality because of stuff. Well, She is the Darkness is not so much about the dark. I mean, have you read sort of like Thoron, have you read The Black Company? Because I don't want to spoil anything here, but like the She and She is the Darkness is a very different kind of She from the lady in the first Black Company books when the lady is the Dark Lady, but actively is actively the Dark Lady running the Empire, being the evil one. Yeah. Look, it's been like so long ago since I watched that. I have no opinions on that either. Nah, nothing bad ever happened after that. You're right, Thornell. Like, what can you do? So one of the things that like I read like last week, and like let's talk about like books for a while. Like one of the books I read last week was a collection of writings by Walter Benjamin, which cool dude, generally really interesting philosopher, writer, all of the other stuff. Wrote like one of the most essential things that anyone who's talking about like art and literature and whatnot in the 21st century should read, which is obviously the artwork in the age of in the age of mechanical reproduction. Um, but this was like a collection of just like writings, autobiographical writings, essays, the whole kind of nine yards. It's really interesting stuff. And what was so fascinating is there was like one essay in there which is Hashish in Marseille, which is him writing about yeah, him getting very stoned in Marseille in the 1920s. And it was just so fascinating because like everything he describes is exactly what I know from, you know, stoner friends basically, and like all of that stuff. But like it's written by, someone who's as fucking intellectual as you can get, and like using the super fucking highly intellectual elaborate kind of prose style to explain how he's, well, just like incredibly fucking stoned, and goes like, well, and then I finished my food and I was like, I'm gonna go to like three other restaurants and get more food, and I'm like, yeah, no shit, you're stoned. So that was like really interesting to read that in that way. Oh, you're getting back to the to your dark satanic mills, Liam. It does have nothing to do with Andy Warhol, simply because Walter Benjamin took his own life because he could not actually get out of Nazi-occupied Europe in the 1930s, and being a leftist and a Jew is not exactly healthy in like 1930s Germany and German occupied rest of the world. No Andy Warhol. But like, yeah, the artwork in the age of mechanical reproduction is a really important text. It's one of those like things that you kind of have to read if you want to talk about stuff after it. The same way that Death of the Author by Roland Barthes is one of those things that you really have to read and understand if you want to talk about like art and stuff in like a more general way. Obviously, not that many people do, but it does sort of like have like a massive impact on anything that comes afterwards. So yeah, I just like thought it was like really interesting to read that, and have someone who's like clearly coming from like a very sort of like different cultural background than like stoners today trying trying to explain how it feels to take drugs, and yeah. So yeah, that was interesting. Um, there's generally some really cool stuff in those like collections. I think like the first English like collection of Walter Benjamin's writings were published, edited by Hannah Arendt, which obviously, very very important and cool person. I don't have lists. I'm really bad with lists, but I feel like for Mormons in particular, I don't know. I feel like I mean, obviously, there's stuff that like Mormons read that I don't necessarily know about because I'm not Mormon. Um, I've read stuff about Mormonism. I've read like the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and stuff like that. But some of the kind of stuff that is sort of like part of that cultural aspect of it, I don't necessarily have access to because I'm not part of that group. And so much of like, especially when it comes to Mormonism, is I think, and that's one of the things that people don't necessarily understand when they talk about like Mormonism and go like, "Hey, read the Book of Mormon. It's so fucking ridiculous." And it's like, yeah, but there's like the idea of like being culturally Mormon means that you grow up like in a specific sort of like culture. You read specific books. You watch specific shows. You have like a very sort of like a very specific media diet, I guess. And I don't necessarily have access to that because that takes like a different approach to like research than the one that I have. So I don't know about that. Yeah, The Origins of Totalitarianism is a really good book. Hannah Arendt, really, really, really impressive a thinker and person. Studied in my city for a while. Like, actually, this is where I live is the town where she hooked up with Martin Heidegger, which is one of those like weird things that yeah. But like Heidegger was a professor in Marburg at the time, where Hannah Arendt was a student in Marburg, and she hooked up with Heidegger at the time, and yeah, just stuff that happened around here. Hey Phil, how you doing? Thornhill is kind of right about the Mormon thing. I don't necessarily have like lists. I think like it really depends on like the topic and like whether I did like where you come from, right? Like one thing that I really like to do when it comes to like like a subject that I don't necessarily know a lot about is like look if there's like I don't know a Rutledge or Cambridge companion on subject whatever, because those are usually they're like collections of essays by a ton of like the big names in that specific field, and you can read those essays and then go through like the sort of like bibliography to see what is the stuff that is read by most people, and kind of go from there. And that's often like how I approach like fields that I'm not familiar with. um with Mormonism, like the Mormon stuff in particular, I think, how did that start? going through that. I mean, obviously beyond reading the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, I think a, like a key text for me with Mormons in particular was American Zion, A New History of Mormonism by what's his name, Benjamin something. Let me check that one. He's really good. I'm just like too distracted to remember his name. Benjamin Park, that's his name. Yeah. So I kind of got into that, and that came out like last year. So that was like basically brand new when I started like doing like research for Mormonism. That came out back then, and Benjamin Park is at least culturally Mormon. I don't know if he's still like officially like a member of the church, but he's certainly culturally Mormon. And but he has a, I think at this point, like an actual chair as a professor of American history, and like it's a good sort of like overview kind of history, and you can take that and go from there and look at like what he's citing, and then dig into details and stuff. And that's often like how I work when I look at like a project. I try to find sort of like overviews, sort of like collections of books, and then go from there into like stuff that most people are citing, and then I read those and see why because even if I disagree with like sort of like the big mainstream text, it's still important to read that, because you know if it's like a mainstream sort of like text, then that means that like everyone has read that, and everyone is sort of like acting and reacting to it, and that means you need to kind of you need to know that one, and you can then go like different directions, but you need to know sort of like what like the big thing is. Hey Joe, how you doing? Hey Libra, how you doing? So like that's sort of like where I started with the Mormonism thing, and then I went from there and I was like, hey, so you have the history, and then you go, and then I looked at biographies of like important people within Mormonism, which is obviously Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and what's his face, Joseph Smith the third. No, Joseph Fielding Smith. This way around. There's too many Joseph Smiths in Mormonism. Like everyone is called Joseph Smith in Mormonism. Anyway, and go from there to like later stuff and look at people like Ezra fucking Taft Benson, and he's probably one of the most like egregious people in Mormonism. At least when it comes to like why the Mormon Church is as troubling as it is right now. There's like two people that need to be blamed for that, and those are like Ezra Taft Benson and J. Reuben Clark. And Ezra Taft Benson was Secretary of Agriculture for Dwight D. Eisenhower, and a big fan and sometimes member of the John Birch Society, and almost running mate to what's his face, American history. I'm not an expert. I mean the segregation now, segregation forever, motherfucker. So he was part of that kind of crowd, and he was president and prophet and revelator of the Mormon Church from the late 70s throughout the 80s into the early 90s, and sort of like dominated like the Mormon Church before that, and that has had like a huge fucking impact. And that's like one of those things that is so interesting, because like in general, I'm like someone who's like, now these are systemic issues, right? But sometimes you have like specific sort of like structures that are sort of like focused on like one or two people where like individuals have like an outsized influence, and that can be really bad. That's the Catholic Church, because popes kind of popes be poping, I guess, and the Mormon Church, like the LDS Church of Latter Day Saints of Jesus Christ, does have like a similar sort of like structure where like a very small group of people has like outsized influence on the direction of where things are going, and that makes it very vulnerable to sort of like individual political ideas and ambitions. That's really cool, like to be on Dear Dr. Fantasy, Joe. I'm very happy for that. Yeah, say that's how I usually approach like research and stuff, is sort of like finding sort of like an entry kind of text, and then like sort of like branch out from there, and then connect it to other stuff. And like oftentimes like the sort of like influences kind of come from like all kinds of places. I feel like look, I'm not an expert on the Mormon Church. I mean, maybe at this point I kind of am, but I don't claim to be, is what I'm saying. But like, it's like what makes the Mormon Church, like the LDS Church, so interesting is how it sort of like changed over time, and how it kind of relates, especially like, and that's something that like Benjamin Park kind of looks at with American Zion, and I think he's too kind and does not actually go far enough. But that's like me speaking here. Um, uh, it's like how a lot of like Mormon identity is tied to trying to become, like trying to be American, and like what it means to have like what an American, and in this case like US American, obviously, identity kind of is, and how you sort of like those two things are in sort of like a constant tension. What with like at the beginning Mormons being outlaw, kicked out of like different states and stuff like that, and how they slowly sort of like try to become the most American Americans that ever Americaned, I guess, in some ways, and how that process sort of like shapes a specific sort of like faith. And once you've reached that point, and the church then also becomes international, is like how do you sort of square that kind of thing, where you have like on the one hand your faith and your cultural the cultural aspects of your faith are like very much tied to having like an American, US American identity in a lot of ways, and how do you then sort of like export that into like a global thing, because obviously that needs adapting, because depending on where you are, America is not necessarily the most loved country in the world, right? And that is super fascinating in like how Mormonism kind of works. Who died? Um, I mean, Donald Trump. I don't know. Like, I mean, like I'm not doing politics. I don't know how well Donald Trump is, but the man is like 80, and what I've learned over the years by like human experiences that people in their 80s tend to die. It's a thing that happens surprisingly often to people in their 70s and 80s. So all hail JD Vance, I guess, which is probably worse, which is hard. Yeah, I mean, look, it's not like Trump dying would actually change anything. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you have a system, and yes, he might be like probably the most useful idiot they have right now, but the system is not gonna change anytime soon, and that's important to sort of like keep in mind. It's like, yes, that guy is obnoxious and he deserves to be hated, and it's easy to hate him because he is so fucking obnoxious in lots of ways, but he's just sort of like the face to like a larger ongoing sort of like systematic kind of dismantling of certain ideas of like democracy and shit. Well, Vance already killed one pope, so I mean, there's that. On the other hand, he might have also killed Hulk Hogan, so I guess you win some, lose some. Who knows? Vance is like super fascinating in that he's managed to have like two popes tell him to fuck off, which is quite the achievement. um, nah, it's nah. It's American politics. It's frustrating. It's dumb. It's fucked up, and I can't help you guys. But I've also been listening to a lot of NoFX, Pennywise, propaganda, and other stuff today. So there's that. Yeah, the Aussie one kind of baffles me. But on the other hand, I mean, to be fair with Aussie's been dying by inches for years and years and years, and that's sad. And of course, I miss Aussie, but on the other hand, I'm like, come on, you take that amount of drugs for like 50 years, you know, what do you expect? I think like at the end of the day, I was way more upset when Dio died compared to like Aussie, because like with Aussie, I was like, yeah, sucks, but it was kind of expected. And yeah, with Dio hit me harder, and Lemmy absolutely hit me hard because Lemmy was sort of like in the middle of between those two, where you're like, yes, the lifestyle was absolutely like the deadliest fucking thing you could ever fucking do. But he was doing that like for so fucking long that at some point you're like, I guess he'll just like live forever. I don't know. And he was still like playing like shows in German, like, yeah, similar to like Aussie, but like obviously that last Black Sabbath show was like already weirdly, you could tell that that man is like on his last legs. And while you could kind of tell that Lemmy wasn't well during those last shows, on that last tour. He was still playing like an entire fucking like 70 whatever minute set. So I don't know. I don't know. Let me hit me harder than Ozzy did. Maybe. I don't know. It's just all like very, very frustrating right now. I think and that's sort of like the thing I've been struggling with is like how do you keep going when like everything kind of burns down around you, and how do you and I've been thinking about that for a while because there's this like one way of looking at this is right is you go like, well, I'm reading like serious stuff, like I'm reading nonfiction, I'm reading leftist literature, whatever, and I'm one of the smart kids that take the world seriously and so forth. And everyone who's reading romantasy or romance or fantasy or whatever, they're all stupid because they are unwilling or unable to actually face the facts of the world. And I'm like, that is bullshit. That's not how that works, right? Like, and because sort of like actively not engaging with the world is not necessarily a sign of like a lack of education, lack of intelligence, or whatever. It's a deliberate choice, and there are like valid reasons to make that choice. And what I find so fascinating for me personally is like how we often, like how so often, like especially like your edgy atheist kind of friends kind of frame like the unwillingness to engage with political stuff as a question of intelligence, because intelligence is like one of those things that we as a society have decided to you know objectivize and turn it into like an objective kind of thing that we can then measure and so forth, and that is bullshit. And it's important to understand that it is bullshit because it's if you don't understand that like the idea of like intelligence and the way we kind of rank it and shit like that, the way we measure intelligence, if you don't understand and accept that it is bullshit, it takes away a vital tool that you need to sort of like criticize artificial intelligence and the whole like ideology around that one at the same time. And I think that's something I've been like thinking about a lot recently. It's like how we so often talk about how the smart kids actually think about like how the world is fucked. And I'm like, no, some people have the like emotional capacity to do that, and some people don't and still do it, and some people make like a deliberate choice to not do that, which is a valid choice to make. And if you want to argue about that, you need to argue about that like in moral terms and not in like pseudo objective like terms like intelligence and that sort of like aspect of like trying to turn things into like quantifiable like objective terms I think is interesting to me. Hey Britton, how you doing? There's always new metal bands. The question is like, what do you mean by new, and what you mean by metal? Like, let me think. What I've been listening to lately that I think is, I mean, it also kind of takes a while for like a band to become like, it's like band has been around for like 10 years, and then they finally release their first album or whatever. But like, there's new stuff happening all the time. But since heavy metal is so fucking big, like one of the things that I really, really find interesting is Imperial Triumphant, and they've been around for like I guess probably like 10 years. Who knows? But it takes a while to actually reach the level of like proficiency they have. So Imperial Triumphant, definitely something I personally really enjoy. And once again, they've been around for a long time, but they kind of a bit like a breakthrough kind of thing in small areas. Last year was Grendel's Sister from like southern Germany, which is like in a positive way the most German band I've listened to in forever, because like they have like the entire album. If you buy it digitally or on CD, you get the whole thing like once completely sung in English and once completely sung in German. And there's like a very specific sort of like vibe to it that I find really interesting. So that's definitely something that is happening right now. What is your sports ball team? I mean, I understand you're American, Britain, and your ideas of sports ball are different from like German ideas of sports ball. Like yesterday, I was at a pub with friends who wanted to watch a German football game. That being, what Americans call soccer kind of thing, and German football being a big deal around here and everything. And the two teams from Hamburg played against each other, and one of them being St. Pauli is obviously like the punk rock, leftist, anarchist, whatever kind of team, and the other one is way more corporate. And well, St. Pauli won, so that's good. But like I have like no deeper connections to any of that. Like okay, yeah. Well, I mean, makes sense since you're from like Oklahoma's there, so that makes sense. But yeah, I don't know anything about that. Like when I grew up, like the the local sports team where I grew up was actually a hockey team because like the city I grew up in is Mannheim in Germany, which is like a weird city for all kinds of reasons. And its soccer club was like, not it's not really good, but it has like one of the biggest sort of like hockey clubs in Germany. So that was sort of like the thing that I grew up with was like hockey. And which kind of works because like Mannheim is a bit of like a working class city. It's a very like direct in your face kind of culture with which works really well with like hockey in that regard. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like for me, like sports is like one of those interesting things in that it's fascinating to see how many people like build so much of their identity on it. And I just like I don't find it fascinating. I mean, if it's a kind of sports I've done in the past, I'm like, yeah, I've had an interest in that because I've done horse riding, I've done like rowing, I've done gymnastics. Um, so I'm interested in that because I can kind of understand what people are doing. Go like, holy shit, that is impressive. Because at least in theory, I know how. In theory, I know how to do that and what it actually takes to do it that well. And I don't have that for like the whole like football, soccer, whatever kind of stuff. It just doesn't. And I'm like, well, I don't know. There's like 22 millionaires kicking around a pig's bladder. That's interesting, I guess. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the problem, right? With like larger like YouTubers, that is more like how to actually reach them because they don't necessarily. And I understand it. Like you become big enough, you don't want to have your like contact stuff out there for everyone because you'll probably get like a lot of like weird messages and shit. Um, I know I I I I suspect they have like a business email or something like that. They should have like something like that. I think hopefully because they need that for like sponsors and shit. So they should be reachable in one way or another. But yeah, good luck with that. So yeah, good luck with that. That's like one of those things that I need to look at. Like it's been a while since we had like a guest on here for one of those live streams, and I want to have like guests again, but I'm running out of ideas. Maybe that's because I'm not watching that much like YouTube, like BookTube anymore. But maybe it's also the summer season kind of thing where I'm like at festivals all the time, so I don't watch a lot of YouTube. Period. Thornall. I think like for me, I think like my favorite Tim Powers is Declare. So the thing with like Tim Powers is that he usually takes like a specific sort of like era and form of literature and plays with that. So it kind of depends on like what kind of style of literature you like. And Declare is like John le Carré with gin. So if you like a historical spy thriller, Cold War spy thriller with gin and some Christian mythology and a lot of like Kim Philby and the Cambridge Five kind of stuff, then Declare is, I think, probably the best Tim Powers to read. I really like that one. Another one that I think works really well is The Anubis Gates, which is time travel killer like horror clowns, early 19th century England and Egyptian magic. So and it's really entertaining. I just think that like thematically Declare is sort of like tighter, I think. I've also read The Stress of Her Regard, which is stuff around Percy Bysshe Shelley and that kind of gang and vampires, which is also good. And Stranger Tides is unfortunately not that good for all kinds of reasons. But yeah, I would go with Declare. No, no, no. Look, at the end of the day, Britain, you are you. You run your show. I will not, I'll listen or I won't. But I'm not going to tell you what to do or what not to do. So I wish you luck with whatever you're going to do because that's your thing. But yeah, I think like as I said, like Anubis Gates is a bit more flashy. I think Declare works really well with the whole idea of like Cold War spy stuff and trying to take control of Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat and stuff like that. And it's the way it sort of like takes in all the weird shit around like Kim Philby and what's his face Guy Burgess and those kind of people. And the way he takes all like the weird oddities that you have in their histories and turns them into like sort of like supernatural bits and pieces to make the story work is just like really impressive. So yeah, Declare or Anubis Gates are the two that I would recommend. No, like Tim Powers in general is just like really good, like really interesting, like the way he does sort of like take historical themes and places and looks like at like weird sort of like the weird shit that happens in history, and we're like, hey, why? And it's like, hey, this would totally make sense if I put this like one magical thing in there. And that's what he does, and he's really good at it. And that's why I kind of like that's what I go for with like Tim Powers. They're like, hey, so that moment when like Percy Bysshe Shelley drowned on like a boating tour in the Mediterranean and all the other stuff around that, like all the weird inconsistencies. If we like added vampires, it would totally make sense. And the same thing with like Declares, like so like late 40s, early 50s and 60s and the defection of Kim Philby and the stuff around Guy Burgess and all of that kind of stuff. If we had like, you know, Jin in that one, like obviously the other Jin, Joe, I saw that, and we're still talking about like 1950s British spies. So you can bet your ass that like a lot of Jin was involved, no matter what, and sometimes also Jin were involved. But yeah, you find that one sort of like supernatural thing that sort of like makes all the inconsistencies suddenly become consistent, and that I think is like really interesting because of like the way that we as humans like we think like in narratives, right? Like we think narratively, and narratives are about like consistency and so forth. But like human life and existence is not necessarily about consistency. It's very inconsistent stuff. Sometimes stuff just happens. So going and taking like history and going like all the times like stuff happened and we're like, this doesn't make sense. And then taking like a fantastical element and going like, now it does make sense, I think is it, it feels like a very sort of like deep sort of like human need of like wanting stuff to make sense. But by being so explicit about it, by being very deliberate, like, yeah, look, this stuff doesn't make sense unless you imagine Jin. And we could all agree that like Jin don't exist, right? Um, you kind of you manage to sort of like point out sort of like that the fact that like we need to sort of like reckon and deal with the fact that like life is not actually a narrative that we can sort of like it life does not conform to narrative conventions, I guess. Snoop Dogg. Yeah. I haven't, kept up with like Snoop, but I can totally see Snoop Dogg actually reading like Drizzt novels and going like, "Hey, this is cool," but also, you know, Snoop Dogg is weird in a cool way. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with like the why I think like Tim Powers works so well and is so interesting to me. Maybe it just like works really well with like with Declare because it is 1950s and other stuff that is like further back in the past stuff becomes less sort of like I don't want to say relevant but less urgent, I think. And that's kind of where I think where I see some of the issues with the Anubis Gates where I'm like, yeah, it's like, yeah, you got Samuel Taylor Coleridge, that's cool, but also it's like 1810 and they jump back to like 17 something something and I'm like, that's cool, but it becomes more like a let's have as many fun cameos of like important people as we can have. I see what you mean, Britain, but on the other hand, I can see Patrick Stewart as everything because Patrick Stewart is Patrick Stewart is Patrick Stewart is Patrick Stewart. But yeah, I don't know. Um, See that's like the other thing, Thornell. I'm not an Animander Rake kind of fan. I don't like Animander Rake that much. I think it's more interesting in the Carcanas trilogy, or like in the first two Carcanas books, because that's sort of like where Animander is annoying, frustrating, anxious, and has all kinds of problems. But like in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Animander Rake is yeah, he's obnoxious because he's just so above everything and so cool and good and strong. And I'm like, fuck you. Not an interesting character, is what I'm saying. That is true, Ida. Silcha's Ruin is definitely the cool one. Like he's the party boy. He's the cool guy from like those like three brothers. Silcha's Ruin is the cool one. He's the one I want to hang out with. Fuck the rest. Like, come on. They take themselves way too seriously, but like with Silcha's, you can party with Silcha's Ruin. Yes, Britain. I did like read the first like 14, 12 or 14, whatever Drift books, or reread them. And no, they're not good. I cannot recommend them. I did have like way more fun this year around, like last year and early this year when I read like all the Redwall books because Redwall actually really good. Also, lots of pirates. and pirates in this case means rats that are pirates. It's pirate rats. Who knows? But yeah, went much better than I thought. And like Redwall, amazing. Silta's Ruin shows up in Midnight Tides for the first time and becomes like a main character in the Reaper scale. Yeah, no, they don't stop. That's the point. They don't stop because R.A. Salvatore doesn't stop. And no, that like the first 12 or whatever, how many were the ones that I already owned in audiobook, and I'm not gonna spend more money on that. I did that at like a sale or whatever, like very cheaply back in the days. So I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. I'm gonna do that. I'm done. I don't think that I'll learn anything new after that. Yes, the one with the well, they're not Crusader mice, but they're like definitely like lots of like furry animals doing like medieval combat to each other in lots of in very explicitly graphic ways. Like that's like one of those fascinating things when you read Redwall, like the first Redwall book, um, when like Clooney the Scourge, which is like the pirate rat with like an eye patch and a poison spike on its tail that he puts on for combat. Um, when they besiege the Redwall Abbey, and you have like they're building like catapults and they're building like siege towers and stuff, and they're digging tunnels, and it's a children's book. But they're still like pouring down like boiling water and boiling oil down into like the siege tunnel that like the besiegers are trying to dig into the abbey, and they're still burning down siege towers, and furry animals are going up in flames all the fucking time, which is interesting. I was not aware of that development, Thornall. I don't know if I want to actually read that. um, there is no Jesus mouse, Britain. There is some interesting stuff. So Redwall Abbey is interesting in that it is an abbey and takes like a lot of like stuff from like the idea of like Christian monasteries, but it does not have like an actual sort of like religion. What they have is Martin the Warrior, who's one of the founders of Redwall Abbey. He's a mouse. Um, and he sometimes appears in dreams when Redwall Abbey is under threat, and then people have those dreams and then do stuff because of the dreams, and that usually saves Redwall Abbey. What is interesting is that like the stories that you have about Martin the Warrior, which is some of the later books that go back in time and talk about Martin and his father and so forth, they are like they're like Mouse Conan, basically. Like Martin the Warrior starts out with like Martin being a slave for these like rats and starting the slave rebellion and all of that. It is astonishingly like bloody and very sword and sorcery ish. So like I can only recommend like read read those Redwall books. Maybe ignore the fact that all of the characters are like small furry animals, but like holy shit, those are like some insanely good books, and like surprisingly violent. Hey Zach, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying Soldiers Live. It's such a good book. It's also so sad. Like I don't know how far you're in, but like the opening, the stuff about One Eye in Soldiers Live is like I don't know. It certainly made me cry several times by now, and I've read it like I don't know 4 or 5 times now. But like that stuff is so good. I don't know if you lose that Thornall, but like the thing with Redwall is like all of these are standalones basically, and they kind of connect and talk about like this like entire like place and time, this like mossflower woods and all of that stuff. But you could just like read some of them, and I highly recommend like the first one, Redwall. Redwall is just like so good. Look, it has Clooney the Scourge being a evil rat with an eye patch and a poison spike at the end of his tail that he puts there for combat, besieging an abbey, besieging Redwall Abbey. And it starts with him like, having his horde on a hay cart driving down the road to Redwall Abbey, and one of his rat um, lieutenants falls off the cart and is run over by the cart and dies. And Clooney says, tell the devil Clooney sent you. And that is a children's book written for like 8-year-olds in the 80s. It is no, trust me, Thornall, you'll love this. It's just like so fucking good. Also, it's got like so many like pirates and stuff. And it has the best anarchist mice of the world. The Gausim, the Guerrilla Union of Shrews in Mossflower, which is shrews, and they all have bandanas and they all have cutlasses, and they decide everything by vote, and they constantly vote out their leaders, and they constantly discuss and they argue and fight all the time about stuff because they're a guerrilla union. And it's like, if you've ever done like leftist politics, if you've ever been like in any sort of like self-organized kind of place, so much of what you do is like argue with other people about like the most insignificant details because you care. That's kind of what makes like a lot of like leftist stuff so slow to actually work, because you care about like every single fucking detail. And this is this scene in one of the later Redwall books, and that one Redwall character, I think it's a squirrel. I think she's a squirrel. And it's like, don't listen to him. He's a shrew. The shrews like to argue, and he's like, no, shrews don't argue. We discuss. And and that's like the most accurate depiction of like leftist activism that I've ever like seen in like children's books like that. We don't argue, we discuss. It is, and and only if you're like on the inside you'll understand that there is a difference, because from the outside it very much looks like arguing all the time. Um, They're like around Discworld book length, so like 300 pages per book, I think, roughly. They vary, but like somewhere between like 250 and 350 pages per book, roughly, I think. I think like one of the things that I found so fascinating about Redwall in particular is like Brian Jakes is, first of all, Brian Jakes, the author of Redwall, is or was a genuinely like fucking amazing cool guy. Like the kind of guy we probably don't have that many of anymore. So he skipped school at like age 15 in like the early 50s, dropped out of school and joined the Merchant Marine and worked as an actual fucking sailor for a while. After that, he worked as like a long haul trucker, and then he ended up working in like the Liverpool School for the Blind as someone who was reading books to blind children, and he got frustrated with like how bad the books that he got to read to kids were, and so he's like, I'm gonna write some books of my own for like young kids. And what is interesting when you read Redwall is like Redwall is very, very, very detailed when it comes to like sensory impressions, because he was like, I'm gonna talk about like not just like visuals, I'm gonna make sure that there's like lots of smells and taste and like other stuff, because I'm writing stories for like blind children, and I want to make sure that they can connect to stuff. So I'm going to make sure that like there's all these other like different sensory impressions in there. And that's one of the things that makes like Redwall so interesting, is how he does all of that. But also like there's like so many pirate stories in there, because it's written by someone who actually served in the merchant marines for like a while, an actual sailor. And no, I don't know, like Redwall is just like really good. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the one when they're talking about the commission for like proper aphorisms, and the aphorism thing, that the patrician institutes the commission for like the accuracy of aphorisms, and yeah, the pen is mightier than the sword. I don't know. It's a it's a Discord thing. It's probably like no other author, no other book has had such a huge impact on me as Terry Pratchett and Discworld. It's like, um, and partly that's because the books are just like really, really good, but it's also because of Terry Pratchett as an author, and not just like as an author, but like as someone whose sort of like personality is very important for like the stuff he wrote. Um, Being very much about integrity is like, you know, I fail at like a lot of things all over the time, right? Like, but like the thing that I'm trying to do is like have like integrity, and Discworld is, Terry Pratchett is like the author with like the where like Terry Pratchett's integrity is the thing that kind of is the through line through all of it, all of Discworld, basically, right? It's like Terry Pratchett's personal values inform every single book very explicitly, and you can see how those values remain the same. His understanding of the world kind of grows and changes throughout the time, but like the fundamental sort of like values stay the same, and they are in the books every single time. It's like you read Discworld, you see Terry Pratchett's personal like values because they are like explicit. And I think that's sort of like where I see the like the parallel with the Monasm Book of the Fallen, right? Like with Stephen Erickson, because Stephen Erickson is another author where like not like Stephen Erickson's like, specific like party politics or whatever. I don't know, and I don't care. But like Stephen Erickson's morals, Stephen Erickson's ethics and personal values are sort of like in the books all the time. There's like they are explicit and they don't change. Like, and that's sort of like having that integrity, like sort of like as the key thing, makes those books so interesting and so powerful to me. I think in a lot of ways, and that's like I feel like the big parallel between like Discworld and the Monasm Book of the Fallen in particular is that they are like first and foremost like books that are like driven by someone who cares about life and cares about humanity and has like very clear like personal ethics and drives that through their art. That's good, Thornell. I think you will actually really enjoy some of the Red Wolf. I mean, they are children's books, but they are like really good children's books, and I think you might actually really enjoy some of that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like what I wanted to say about like the connection between why I like Terry Pratchett so much and why I also like the Manasa Book of the Fallen, about why I like Stephen Erickson's writing so much is like that sort of like very clear sort of like ethical backbone, like integrity in a lot of ways. And the more I read, I think the more I care about that, and that's probably like why I struggle with some of the more like popular grimdark kind of stuff, because why I can while I can struggle and probably come up with like Joe Abercrombie's sort of like ethical, moral, whatever values, the books don't have that, right? Like that's kind of the thing, that like the nihilism in a lot of like grimdark is very much built on not ever actually showcasing and actually stating the fact that you have like actual beliefs and morals and stuff. And I think that's like harmful in the long run, because and you have that like weird connection, right? Like where you have the idea that having like fully stated like moral values is sort of like often tied to like a religious kind of thing, and you had that whole like era of like all the edgy atheist skeptics and going like, everything is relative and so forth. No, moral values are not relative. You don't have to justify them by appealing to like a higher power, but you can still go like, no, this is good and this is bad, and I believe this, and this is not something that we can actually discuss. There are some things that I believe in that are objectively good, and there are some things that I believe in and that I believe that are objectively bad, and we can't. This is not up for discussion, right? Like genocide is bad, for example, right? Like we don't need to discuss this. You can't relativize this shit. And you have this like you had this like era in like especially when it came to sort of like some eras of some areas of grimdark fantasy where suddenly like everything was like, yeah, it's all gray, and maybe the good guys are actually bad, but the bad guys might not just be that bad, but like everything is kind of fucked up. It's like, no, there are some things that are just like clear, and we should actually be able and willing to say that some things are just objectively bad and wrong, and some things are objectively good, and that's also nice, right? Like we need that sort of, and we. It's not about like how we justify it. It's just like to understand that some things are objectively good. Jules Verne is actually so good. Like I read like a lot of Jules Verne when I was a kid, but I did reread some of them later on and was like, holy shit, there's like actually so much more stuff in there that is interesting and funny. Like 80 Days Around the World is actually surprisingly funny if you read it as an adult, I think. I think Shadow Throne is in fact a very clear, like Shadow Throne has like key morals. You know, it's a the Shadow Throne quote. It's a Shadow Throne quote, right? Like the Malazan quote, the Stephen Erickson quote that I think is at the end of the day, sort of like the absolute like encapsulation of everything that Stephen Erickson has ever written. That makes the Malazan Book of the Fall. That makes everything is the children are dying, and I think it's that it's either Cotillion or Shadowthrone. It's one of the two saying that, right? Like children are dying. Oh no, no, it's Diker, but like it's Diker, but like that for me is sort of like the Manazan, the Steven Erickson, whatever like thing that makes and breaks. Well, it doesn't break, but like it makes the series is like children are dying. The tragedy of the world is encapsulated in those three words: children are dying. It's like, yeah, if you don't think that that's, like actually evil, bad, and so forth, then you know we will not have a conversation. And you can see those situations throughout the entire series. Right? Like is that like I think it's like either the opening thing of Dust of Dreams or the Crippled God when you have Cotillion go this like, no, I will not justify what I'm doing. I'm doing this because this is right, and I will not argue about that. And like, yeah, yeah, because you can't at some point you can't actually argue morals, because morality is something that is sort of outside of like well, outside of debate. Let's put it this way, right? Like you can talk about like individual actions, whether they're like, okay or not, and stuff like that. But like good and evil are sort of like the kind of concepts that you can't actually argue about. It's like because like so much of it is sort of like intuitive, and you know if something is wrong and it feels wrong, right? Like you have that, or you don't, and if you don't, then you're a psychopath, like I don't know, psycho or sociopath, or like but like there's stuff that just like is wrong, and I think it's important to sort of like keep in mind that a lot of this sort of like kind of goes beyond the rationality in some ways. Um, the same way that say like religion kind of goes like faith goes beyond just rationality, which is why like all like the skeptics going like, oh, I can doing like skeptics debates and trying to prove that God doesn't exist. That's bullshit. That will never fucking work because what makes you a believer is like far more like an emotional thing than like right clearly like rational kind of thing. And like I feel like morality is oftentimes also that it's like, yeah, you can rationally agree to follow rules and laws and stuff like that, and that is necessary and important, and we need to do that. But the understanding that something is wrong, that is an emotional choice. That is not necessarily something you can. I mean, you can think about it and try and build on that, like sort of like build on that emotional like a foundation, build like a rational sort of like structure of like rules and understanding and behavior and shit on that. But there are some things that we just like that are just like sort of like emotional, I think. Like sort of like intuitive in one way or another. And those and we need to sort of like at least accept the fact that that is the case. Because even if those sort of like emotions are, no longer helpful, valuable, or whatever, we still need to, even if we want to oppose them, we still need to understand that they are sort of like pre-rational if we want to sort of like deal with them and find ways to sort of like counter them. If we disagree, we still need to sort of accept the fact that some of that stuff is, pre-rational in a way. No, no, Britain, it is not revolutionary at all. I mean, you will read Dead House Gates. You will come to that point. You will understand why like beyond anything else. Like I think like the concern about children suffering for all kinds of reasons, whether it is because of the problems of their parents or whether it is because of like poverty, drought, famine, whatever, is one of the key concerns of the Malazan Book of the one of the key concerns of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is exactly the idea that trauma and suffering gets perpetuated because children are made to pay sort of like for the suffering of the previous generation in a lot of ways, and one of the things that we need to do is sort of like break that cycle of abuse and suffering and make sure that like children don't actually sort of like grow up with that, like grow up suffering like all the pain and damage that like the previous generation had to suffer. And that is just like one of the key things that like Steven Erickson is concerned with. And none of that is revolutionary, but it's also not exactly something that happens to be sort of like front and center in like every single epic fantasy series that you read. So it is still kind of novel for like a fantasy series, I think. To be fair, Thornell, I've eaten some really, really bad cakes in my time, so I get it, I think. But yeah. So no, like that quote, Britain is not, it's not revolutionary, but it does, I think, encapsulate sort of like one of the key theses of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is exactly that, like children are dying The tragedy of the world is encapsulated in those three words: children are dying. And if you don't, if that is not like something that moves you to, do something, then that's the problem, right? Like, we all know this is happening, but we need to do something about it. And if you don't feel moved to do something about the fact that children are dying, then that is the problem. And that level of like, and I think that's like important when it comes to like the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Is like, it's a book to read, like it's a series of books to read and enjoy, but like there is an activist component to the whole thing. It's like you're supposed to actually, like, you read the Malazan Book of the Fallen, you should become a better person afterwards. You should actually actively try to do good things. And if you don't at least feel the need to do that, even if you don't actually do it, then that's when the book has failed, or you have failed to actually read the book, I think. Well, Dead House Gates has a happy ending, so there's that. But yeah, no, you'll like Dead House Gates is a very different beast from Gardens of the Moon in all kinds of ways. It's so much more darker. Like, holy shit. I wouldn't. I don't like. Maybe that's like a me problem, right? Like, I read Dead House Gates. It did not make me cry. It made me very angry. But that's kind of the point. Like what Thornwell said. Like, the Malazan Book of the Fallen is the kind of book that will get you very angry, and it will be like righteous anger, which is good. I personally approve of like righteous anger. Dead House Gates does have like a lot of like, what on our planet you would consider war crimes. So yeah, you'll get a lot of like war crime stuff, which is, you know, not good, I guess. But it also deals with like, the idea of like imperialism and colonialism and resistance against colonialism, and how that, how crimes against humanity make it very easy to justify other crimes against humanity in response and so forth. It does go into that kind of stuff. So yeah, look, it's a very brutal book, is what I'm saying. Like, um, lots of people are dying all the time in very explicit ways. um, yeah, I know what Thornall means, and no, it's bad. Like, one of those really interesting things about the especially the beginning of book 4, like House of Chains, is that like everyone loves Karsa Orlong, who sucks. Like Karsa Orlong sucks, and that's important. But he's like your Conan the Barbarian kind of type. He's very explicitly sort of like a deconstruction of Conan in a lot of ways, and a lot of people read that and go like, "He's awesome." It's like, well, the first part of that book is Karsa Orlong going like, "Let's go down into the valley and kill children," and you're still rooting for that guy. Like, you might want to step back and think about, the thing and like what you're, agreeing to and whatnot. Because it's not like he's, holding back or anything, right? And I find that like super fascinating. It's like how many people go like, yeah, fuck yeah, Casa Oolong. It's like, no, that's uh, that's probably the wrong lesson to learn. Well, yes, he is a barbarian. Among other things, there's a lot more to Karsa Orlong, and there's certainly stuff that Erickson does with Karsa Orlong throughout the story that is makes him a very fascinating and interesting and nuanced character, and and so forth. But like, I've seen people go like, "Yeah, I love the first part of House of Chains because finally it's like Conan." It's like, hey, if you think that is like Conan, you probably misunderstood Conan, but you're also misunderstanding the Manazan Book of the Fallen. But then you Mike's book reviews, and you probably don't understand Conan because you're not exactly a very, a person who does a lot of like reflection is what I'm saying right now. But yeah, no, no, of course, like the opening of House of Chains is interesting in its sort of like deconstruction of Conan. And one of the things I find so fascinating is that it is a deconstruction of Conan. But like, if you actually go back and read a lot of like Robert E. Howard stories, right? That stuff is also like not exactly, subtle when it comes to, Conan being a bit of a monster, to put it mildly, right? Like, I mean, you read The Frost Giant's Daughter, and well, it's Conan deciding to not to put too fine a point on it, to go and rape a woman because she dances in front of him seductively, and that seems to give him the right to actually, rape her, which obviously it doesn't. And yes, it gets justified in the plot because she's, the daughter of the first giant, King Ymir, and she wants to lure him into somewhere, and then they're gonna kill him and take his heart and offer it as a sacrifice. But like, he's still at the core is his thought that like, as a man, it is his right to just take whatever the fuck he wants. And that is very explicit, and that is something that certainly comes up in like a lot of like Robert E. Howard's Conan stories. And yes, Erickson makes it slightly more explicit when he talks about, killing children and stuff, but the thing has always been there. And if you think that is cool, yeah, I don't know. You might want to, think again, probably. And if you still think it's cool, then I don't know. I have opinions. Thornall, that is actually really good. I like that. No, Britain, it's not bad that it is your favorite. So here's the thing, like I feel like The Frost Giant's Daughter is a very, very powerful story. It works really well. Like, holy shit, right? Uh, like what kind of lesson you're taking out of that in so many ways. I do like I do like the Phoenix and the Sword as well. I would have to think what is my favorite Conan story. Um, so like from like pure entertainment and all kinds of other stuff, I think that the Tower of the Elephant is just like one of the like tightest stories. Like when it comes to like writing and everything, it is just like really like so good. And it's like, yeah, you just like wrote like a dungeon crawl into a story that is actually really good because it's really short and it's on point and everything works. That is just like really good. I I do like what's it called? Beyond the Black River? The one where Conan only shows up at the end and talks about the dog. I do like that one. I really like Red Nails. I really like it's called The Black Stranger. I do like a lot of like the later Conan stuff a lot. I do really enjoy Which Shall Be Born, I think is really good. And I do like oh god, House of Rogues. House of Rogues is so good and funny and weird. Yeah, Queen of the Black Coast is so good. Hey Jared, how you doing? No, I think like the thing with the Conan stories is that they are like just like such a like a very specific kind of thing in that they are, written to make money, in that like Robert E. Howard was, trying to actually make it as a pulp writer. But they're also like very, very clearly, very heavily influenced by Robert E. Howard's weird psychology and like all his like mental health struggles and stuff. And I don't know if you guys have ever read Novelin Price's book One Who Walks Alone, or watched the movie. I think the movie is called The Whole Wide World. And Novelin Price something something. I keep forgetting her second name because I'm stupid and stuff. But Novelin Price was well, as close to having an actual like relationship with Robert E. Howard as one could actually get as a woman, I guess. And it's built sort of like on her diary entries from the time, and like Robert E. Howard is just like one of those like really tragic kind of people, like where we can tell like so much like there's so much stuff wrong with that man that it's kind of difficult to, you know, point anything specific out, and you read these books, and you can see how much like his like personal struggles sort of like influence his writing, and I think that makes Conan stories like actually work so well compared to some stuff that has been written over the years where you can tell it was just written for the money, because Robert E. Howard is writing to make money, but he's also very much putting himself into these stories in a way that he's not just doing like entertainment. He's doing something else, and I think that is what makes Conan stories sort of like resonate over the years and over the, well, decades at this point, almost centuries, where you're like, yeah, something does feel real in when you read like a Conan story, and that was written by someone who was like clearly putting his like personal struggles into that story. No, I don't think I would read Conan stories by anyone else but Howard, because yeah, it feels too personal. Like I'm fine reading like other like Cthulhu mythos stories, general like mythos stories by people that are not H.P. Lovecraft, but I feel like Conan is too personal in a lot of ways. Would I read something else set in the Hyborian Age? Yes, definitely. But Conan feels too personal. Are the are those the Dark Horse or are those the ones that like oh, I keep forgetting who did those, but like they were like mid 2000s, so like around 2005 ish Conan comic books, and they were like really good. Like some of them were like really close to like the actual stories. I don't know who did those, but like those were really good. Solomon Kane. So here's the thing with like Solomon Kane, right? It's like some of them are really good. The things like the Solomon Kane stories, the stuff set in Africa is sort of like where like how its racism comes through like the most explicitly, and that makes them like really hard reading today when you go like, because it's not necessarily like it's like weird Howard racism where there's like good black people and there's bad black people, and they are described in like really racist terms, and then that shit is really bad. But something like oh god, what's it called? The one set in Germany that I really like, the one where he's in that inn that is like that murder inn kind of thing. That one is pretty cool, and uh it's called Moon of Skulls. Not Moon of Skulls, something Skull in the Stars, something like that. That one is also pretty cool. Like no, Solomon Kane is interesting in those regards. Like some of the stuff, some of the stories set in Africa are just like holy shit. Um, well, Puritan is one of those like really complicated like monikers because there's so much that gets called Puritan that is not. I mean, Puritan is a slur for like nonconformists, right? And it goes for like all kinds of different people, so it's difficult. But like, I should probably not like overthink that one. um, but Thornall, Karl May is. I mean, that was like one of the choices for like last year's like Christmas reading thing because I've read a lot of Karl May as a kid because I'm German and my my father's read a lot of Karl May and my grandfather's read a lot of Karl May and I kind of inherited all of those books, so I've read a lot of Karl May and oh boy, that stuff is interesting and weird, and it would be. I think it would be really interesting to actually talk about that. Because it does have some like really interesting things to say about so like 19th century Germany, 19th century European ideas about both the East and the West. There's some heavy Orientalism because like Karl May wrote both about American like Western kind of stuff, but also like stories set in the Near and Middle East, and those are really fascinating as well. And there's a lot of like crazy shit going on there, and that's all before we even talk about Karl May as a person who was certainly fascinating. And that's before we talk about like how much impact sort of like Karl May has had like on uh, like generations and generations of German people because that stuff was huge. Probably no longer like not with like the current generation, but like all the way up to like the 80s and 90s, Karl May was like a huge thing. Like everyone has, knew some Karl May stuff. And that is worth talking about in a lot of ways. But yeah. I guess it's like the usual like me problem where I'm like, how seriously should I take this? Because you can turn this into like a whole like fucking like academic dissertation at the end of the day, if you wanted to. Yes, Britain. Adolf Hitler liked Karl May because of course he did. And by of course I mean like everyone growing up at that time liked Karl May. That's kind of the point there. I read Win like did you read all three volumes of Winnetou? Because there's like three volumes. I think I read Old Shatterhand. Yes. I'm not sure about Old Shatterhand. I've read some of the stuff set in like the Middle East as well. Treasure at Silver Lake I've also read. Like one of those like interesting things is like it's it's really weird, Annie. Like first of all, hey, welcome. I think it's so what is so fascinating about Karl May is that it has this sort of like weird fascination in that it is like racist, but in like a positive way. and that it like builds on like racist stereotypes, but like the positive side of things, and it's like, all the American Indians are like the really good people. Like not all of them, but like, the lots of noble savages in those books, and stuff like that. And there's this sort of like underlying weird like Christian mysticism that Karl May was sort of like partial to, that also infused like a lot of his writing. And it's a weird kind of thing, is what I'm saying, and it's fascinating to write about that, and to read about that, and to talk about that. But it's also like sort of like, how many people have actually read that, and how available is it? Because I don't know how much of that stuff is actually available in English, for example, because that might be like a big deal. Also, like the German Karl May movies are like sort of like one of those like real staples of like European movie history from like the 1970s, I guess, because they were like, German produced, but they were filmed mostly in Yugoslavia at the time, because that's where you film westerns if you can't actually afford to go to the US. And you have this like weird sort of like mix of like different European actors pretending to be, Americans and American Indians, and all kinds of stuff. It's a weird thing. And those movies, they're insanely cringy if you watch them today, but like it's interesting to see how they once again sort of like shape sort of like a lot of people's sort of like image of like the 19th century American West in Europe, because they were huge in they're like fucking huge in Germany, but like also like in the rest of Europe, they were like really big. And that's like so fascinating. Well, I mean, Hitler did like Karl May a lot, so there's that, and those are some of those are cowboy books. Um, Thornall. So the answer is yes, there are books that are like that, but for the longest time they were like really hard to find, and it has changed over the last couple of decades. But for the longest time, that was not exactly something that was promoted a lot, I think. Yeah, yeah, the same thing like in Germany, like, right, like Karl May was like a huge, still is like a huge deal in Germany, and that is interesting and weird. And I mean, it's more like interesting to see like how much that has sort of like impacted stuff. And it's like one of the things that is tied to Karl May, and that is really fascinating, is that Germany has a lot of like reenactment scenes that do like American Indian reenactment stuff. And a lot of like the best scholars in by now basically dead tribal languages are live in Germany, because of Karl May. A lot of people got like really interested in native like life and stuff, and started studying that, and like really well, reenactment, like reenacting their lifestyle and stuff like that. But like out of that became like a lot of like collecting like vocabularies, collecting languages and stuff like. So some of the like the foremost like experts on different like native languages are Germans coming out of that specific tradition. So by being the weird guy that he was and writing the weird shit that like Karl May did right, which had like no connection to like actual American realities in any way, shape, or form, because Karl May was not in the US like until like late in his life, so much later than writing these books. Um, he still sort of like kindled like an enthusiasm that then led to actual actual like research and academic stuff being done and preserving cultural elements and shit like that. So it's weird, is what I'm saying, and it's strange. Yes and no. He's like he's like Germany's Rudyard Kipling if Kipling had never actually been to India. It's it's much weirder. Like um it's not perfect, but like if you wanna learn about like like the early stuff about like Karl May, Behind the Bastards has like a 2 episode kind of thing on Karl May. Like he was a con man, right? Like he was like convicted for like fraud and stuff. And then he started making up stories and became like really, a celebrity with these stories that were sort of like almost like they were written like travelogues, like I did this and this and this and this. Like he never explicitly said like I did this, but it was like sort of like heavily implied that he was the person who did all of this traveling and shit. But he was like convicted as a conman several times for like selling, selling fake watches and like you're like really basic scam kind of stuff. E- and that's kind of also part of like the Karl May kind of story in a lot of ways. Yes, that's the thing. Like Kipling was born in India. All right, guys. I'm gonna leave you for like 2 minutes because I need to actually take a piss for a second, and then we can talk more about Karl May. And maybe I should actually do this like this year and like for the Christmas reading thing, read like I don't know 12, 13, 14, whatever Karl May stories and talk about them because that stuff is sort of important, I think, because it did have like a huge impact on like a lot of like stuff downstream in a lot of ways. Well, no, yeah, Kipling is actually a good writer. Karl May is not. That's an important aspect. All right. I am back. Sort of, kind of, whatever. Um, all right. Brief History of Seven Killings is such an amazing book. It made me understand why, even though I really hate reggae, I can at least understand and respect it. No, Thornall. I have done. I did Redwall last year. I'm not going to go back to Redwall because I did like the first like 13 Redwalls. I don't think it's worth. So I'm gonna read some of the other Redwall books, just for my own enjoyment. But I don't think I'm gonna do like the same way. I'm not gonna do like another like 13 nights of Drizzt reading. So I'm gonna find something else. So it might just be Kalmai at this point, or as I said, and this is still very much an option. And I very tempted to do that. I could just go like read all of the Left Behind series and go through all of those like one per day, and that would be interesting. I think it would also probably be, how can I say this, enraging. I think. Did you know that like Tim LaHaye, who you know is one half of the people that wrote the Left Behind series, was a very active person in the early days of the John Birch Society. Also, does that surprise you? Probably not. Yes, that is exactly the thing, Thornall. Nikolai Kaparthe, which is like holy shit. Someone really thought they came up with like the most vampire sounding name ever. Which only works as like the most vampire sounding name ever if you nevertheless left like the Midwest of the US, I think. Now, I've not looked into that later on, but like I said, here's the thing. So, like early today, I was listening to one of my favorite NoFX albums. Like, if you're into punk rock, NoFX, obviously a big band, and they have an album called "Wolves in Wolves Clothing," and they have a really good song called "Leaving Jesus Land," which is all about things like religious fundamentalism in the American Midwest. And I'm not going to go too much into details. I'm pretty sure that it would probably offend and really piss off Britain a lot, which is, I don't want to do that, is what I'm saying. The song is really good, though. And one of the funniest lines in that, and I want to bring that up just for that, is like, no longer svelte. They might to have to punch more holes into the Bible Belt. And that is just like one of those like really funny things that I'm like, wow. You just made like a really, really dumb joke, like a really offensive joke about the obesity epidemic in the US and tied it to your criticism of like religious fundamentalism in the Midwest, and that is both like genius, but also like really offensive. But like, yeah, they need to punch more holes into the Bible Belt is just like one of those things I will probably never fully forget. But that's like I've not been to Carpathia. Um, like I know a lot. I've known several people from Romania, from different parts of Romania, by the way, in particular, and obviously, like Germany and Romania have this like weird sort of thing where you have like a German minority in parts of Romania, right? Like around like Sibiu and so forth, and it's weird, is what I'm saying. But yeah, but like Nicolae Carpathia is just still like one of the dumbest like things, like it is insultingly, stupidly racist in that regards. Like it's like it's like the same way as like we have an American character and he's called like Washington Freeman, and no, don't do that. Like you know what I mean? Like it is dumb as fuck, and that's kind of the problem with like I think Left Behind. But since it was like such a huge fucking deal for like a large part of like American society, it might be worth actually reading those books and taking them apart and I don't know, comparing them to stuff that is actually written in the Bible, which is one of those books that like so few people have actually read for I don't know reasons, because there's interesting stuff in that book. Yeah, exactly. Strong bright lens, yeah, and that's kind of the problem. Is like, come on. If you manage to be like more racist than fucking Dracula, then you might want to, rethink the thing you're doing. Although, to be fair to Bram Stoker, Dracula, there is a really good point about Dracula. The one guy that dies, spoiler, is the American. No, now it's been a while since I read Dracula. I do think it's a really, really good book. I was also somewhat distracted by the audiobook, which is like Audible has like a really good audio production. There's a lot of weird stuff with like Dracula. I'm not disputing that. I think the format of the epistolary novel kind of works really well for Dracula, and I am a very I'm easily swayed by stuff. Um, One of the things that makes the Audible audiobook version really good is that Dr. Seward, the psychiatrist, is like his diary stuff is narrated by Tim Curry, and that does certainly bias me because it's Tim Curry. What can I say? I'm I've seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and if Tim Curry narrates the Dr. Seward psychiatrist parts of the of Dracula, that does very much amp up the quality of the entire book for me. Um, um, so here's an interesting thing, Britain, and a book recommendation. I highly recommend everyone read Blood in the Machine by Brian Merchant, which is about the Luddite uprising, and it does look into how the Luddite uprising actually is one of the inspirations for Frankenstein, for Frankenstein, because and like both obviously Percy Shelley was at least interested in it. Lord Byron was influenced in and interested and active in like support for the Luddite uprising. One of the more like the weirder stuff that I didn't know and that certainly made me like more interested in books that I was previously not too interested in, but go more like, hey, I should probably read this. Is that the father of the Bronte sisters, of Charlotte, Emily, and so forth, Bronte, he was actually like the Reverend who, like the priest in charge of like a lot of the people that did, you know, do all the Luddite activism shit and activism, resistance, that kind of stuff. So and that does influence like a lot of the writing of at least some of the Bronte sisters like writings, the same way it does impact Frankenstein and stuff. So having that connection was like something I was not aware of before I looked at it, because you know it's 19th century British history. Who the fuck cares? I mean, apparently we all have to, but I didn't before because it involves guns and shit, and I feel like history stops being interesting when people invade firearms. So like I know around like 1500 is sort of like when I usually stop paying attention. So yeah, but that was one of the things that I found really interesting, and like how much sort of like the Luddite uprising influenced sort of like writing and literature as well. And yeah, so go read Brian Merchant's Blood in the Machine, which is really good because it's a history of the Luddite uprising, and it does sort of like connect it to current sort of like a- attempts of resistance against like big tech in all kinds of ways. So it's worth that as well. But it is also just like a very good history of like the Luddite uprising, which should be talked about more because it is such a really interesting and important sort of like aspect of like history, industrial history, and we kind of ignore so much about this because Luddites are not enemies of technology, but like enemies of like how technology gets used, and that's a big fucking difference. So yeah, highly recommend that. Really good book. Lots of fun. Um, Lots of like people breaking machines, which sometimes you have to. And but yeah, I feel like the more important part is like really the understanding that it's not so much about like actually, it's not so much about like fighting technology, but like fighting about like the implementation of technology. And a lot of times when people go like, "Oh, you're a Luddite because you hate technology," it's like, no, it's not that I hate technology. It's about how we sort of like implement technology and like how we put that into like a social context, and that's the thing that we need to talk about because technology as a thing is neutral. It's like the social framework around it that kind of is the thing we need to talk about. And by sort of like reducing it to like opposition to like technology, we it's it, the idea is that you kind of take away sort of like the political sort of like impact. Go like, no, oh, you just hate progress. It's like, no, that's not the thing. And it's important to sort of like be aware of that sort of like trick and to oppose that and make sure that that doesn't actually work. And then, you know, I said like Blood in the Machine, I think works really well in that regard because it does sort of like explain how that works and how that worked in the 19th century and why it, is something we should probably be aware of. Plus, lots of like machine breaking, which is also fun. I see. I would never call myself a Luddite, but I think I'm very sympathetic with like the original Luddites. They were definitely in the right, and I think it's important to sort of like keep fi- you can learn a lot from like the Luddite uprising when it comes to sort of like organizing labor and organizing sort of like society against an elite idea of like how to push through technological advances in order to sort of like reinforce current ideas of hierarchy. And that's kind of what it is about, because the technology itself is not the problem. It's like the way it is used and the way it is being used to sort of like keep hierarchies alive and probably like more like enforce certain forms of hierarchy. And that's in that regard, yes, of course I'm a Luddite. I mean, come on. I like as far as I can say, the current pope will not do that. He seems to be, well, I mean, for a pope, a comparatively cool dude, I think. I mean, you don't you're not like a raging Marxist once you end up being pope. That's not going to happen. But like the current pope, Leo, the whatever his number is, he seems to be a fairly sort of like okay. He seems to be okay, is what I'm saying, which is fine. Which is like more than I was. I was worried. And I'm saying this is like as a German because yeah, the last time we had a pope, like last time a German became a pope, that guy was really bad, is what I'm saying. And it's not just about him being a member of the SS, which you know bad, but sort of like with that age around that time, how much choice did he have? But afterwards, he was still like a very, very conservative kind of person, to put it mildly. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, Trump might just be sick enough at this point to actually become the new leper king of Jerusalem. So maybe it'll work. Who knows? But yeah, global politics is so fucking frustrating. Which like here's the thing with like Ratzinger, right? Like I hate the guy, right? Like but like Ratzinger was a very, very well educated person. He was like very intelligent and very, very well educated. Like I disagree with the guy on like just about like everything, but it does not pay to underestimate Ratzinger. That's kind of the thing. And I was so fucked up. Like I read an interview with uh, an American death metal band. I think it was like what's the guy from Atheist? Yeah, 90s death metal band is like, yeah, I'm gonna I'm gonna win like a debate against the Pope, and I'm like, no, you will not. Like, like you might be right about like everything, but you will not win a debate against fucking Ratzinger. That's not gonna happen. Like that guy has, you know, debate skills that you can't even think of, and yeah, he's still wrong. He's still evil, but he's and it's so interesting that oftentimes people go like, yeah, but, you know, the Pope is stupid. It's like, no, the Pope is not stupid. Like there are people in some areas of like more freewheeling, sort of like evangelical denominations where people can become, sort of like boss hog by whilst being incredibly stupid and stuff. That is possible in general, but Pope's not one of them. That does take a lot of like very, very specific skills, and you will not end up Pope. Like I could not become Pope even if I were, a believing Catholic. I don't think I have the level of like discipline and like academic discipline to actually reach that level. And I can respect that. I'm like, yeah, you're wrong, but you're good at what you're doing. And that is something that I feel people often sort of like underestimate when they're talking about the Pope. It's like, no, like if you're a Pope, you're probably like an incredibly well educated and probably very smart person. And that sort of like conflation between sort of like moral things and like belief and ideas about religion and like general sort of like intellectual skills, those are like different things. And we often sort of like sort of conflate the two, and I think that's like a huge problem in the long run. Well, have fun with the game, Britain. That too, Thornall. Yeah, well, Brutus. Yeah, but I think, and that's something I've been thinking about like a lot recently. That like how we sort of like value and like how we judge sort of like intellectual capacity and how that suddenly does carry sort of like moral weight and in all kinds of ways, and that leads to some like really big like issues down the road in it's like, hey, I can explain this one scientific thing, so clearly all my opinions on other stuff will be also be really good and will be right and stuff, and because you sort of like transfer at least the idea of like objectivity from like something that does have objectivity, like certain aspects of science, and you transfer that to stuff that does not have objectivity, because that's not how politics work most of the time. And that is just like really interesting to me to sort of like watch. I would not say that science is a religion. There are, parallels between certain ideas of like how we relate to science. When it comes to like what is actually a religion, I would say that economics as a discipline is very much a religion at this point. And I'm not saying that, because I'm, you know, a leftist. I'm not exactly a fan of capitalism, but the way that like economics are run and used these days is very much very close to sort of like religion in a lot of ways. And that's a problem. Like even if I, were not the kind of person I am, and even if I would not, believe that the current form of like capitalism is not exactly sustainable or anything of the sorts, I would still argue that the way that religion that like economics have turned into an almost like religious approach to like building a worldview is a bad idea, I guess. I'm trying to be like a very mild person today. I'm trying to not constantly call people like Nazis and shit. But when it comes to like science becoming a religion, it's like I don't know. Thornall, have you looked at like 19th century positivism? I mean, you might have. That's this like a generally like question. If you've ever looked at like Comte and 19th century positivism, because that is exactly the thing where someone tried to turn science into like a religion, to sort of like take that impulse of being religious and like turning it into science, which is did not necessarily end well, because the idea that you can quantify everything does lead down some very dark paths. And some dudes wrote a book about that, and that book is really really good, and also like really hard to read and frustrating. And it's called The Dialectics of Enlightenment, and it was written by Max Horkheimer. And Theodor Adorno, and they were part of the Frankfurt School of Social Research, and are now famously known as cultural Marxists. But yeah, highly recommend reading that one as well. No, that was before that. Candide is like, I mean, Voltaire wrote Candide in the mid 1700s, and Comte and positivism is like a 19th century thing. So there's like a century between that, but like it is still sort of like the same sort of idea of looking at the world, but like Comte did actually try to devise sort of like scientific holidays and like actually pattern it like a religion. So that's kind of what Comte did with like his form of like positivism. Right. So that's sort of like so it is still it's the same sort of like understanding, the same idea, but like with Comte in particular, it gets much more formalized, and that's kind of what like Adorno and Horkheimer are then looking at and going like, hey, this is this is going to lead to fascism, you know. Um, but they, I mean, they don't look at like Voltaire that much. They look a lot at Francis Bacon, and I took like a course at university during my philosophy studies. I took a course on just reading the Novum Organon by Francis Bacon, and it's an interesting text, but it does definitely sort of like, if you want to go down that road, it does give you like a very specific sort of like idea of like how the world works that can lead to some really dark places. Which, you know, to be fair, is a fairly obscure kind of thing, but like mostly like the Novum Organon is kind of the book that does sort of like go like, hey, so if the entire universe is mechanical, it means there's like buttons to push and levers to pull and so forth. So what we need to do is actually find out where those buttons are and where those levers are and how to actually use them, because then we could actually, you know, use the entire fucking universe to do whatever we want it to do. And once you actually make that step, and you know, this is like 16th century, and he's still believing in God. Was like, well, God created a universe for us to use, so we just need to figure out how to actually use the whole thing. It still leads down some very, very dark paths incredibly quickly, and Bacon does sort of like leave most of that sort of like open, which is, you know, why reading Bacon is helpful, I think. Also very frustrating. Heinlein, I don't know. It depends, right? I think there's some Heinlein that is really good. There's some Heinlein that's just like plain weird, and then there's stuff in between. I think that The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is actually a really good novel that I really enjoy. I feel Stranger in a Strange Land is interesting. It does have some like really, really dumb sexism that feels like, that's like the weird thing with like Hainan often, because Hainan has like a lot of like weird sex stuff where it's like you're kind of aware of like how sexism kind of sucks, but you're still kind of putting it in kind of thing. And Stranger in a Strange Land is exactly that. Like a lot of like weird shit in Stranger in a Strange Land is about like the professor guy. I keep forgetting his name. it doesn't really matter that much. But like being a massive sexist asshole to his like three young, good-looking secretaries that also all have sex with him, I think. And it's written in a way where you're like, hey, you kind of this is creepy and dumb and wrong and shit, but you're still putting it in, right? And that's like sort of like the Heinlein thing for me is like Heinlein is so weirdly aware of like shit that's wrong and puts that in his books, and then still like does not actually ever take a stand in any of these ways. Like the only stand he takes is like when it comes to freedom of like let me do whatever the fuck I want, which yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I think like Moon is a Harsh Mistress, really good novel. I really like that one. Um, and yes, there's problems with it. Of course there is, but I think it worked really well. And Stranger in a Strange Land was good. I feel Starship Troopers is bad, and I'm not, you know, not just because of like the message. It just is not like a very good book. But I did read that as part of like a research project about like war fiction, and I did read All Quiet on the Western Front right before it, and Slaughterhouse 5 after it, so it may have suffered just like from you know the stuff I read around it being just like so much better. And yeah, you want to read like a really depressing book? Read All Quiet on the Western Front. I don't want to recommend it, but yeah, read that book. It's really good. It's just also like really depressing. Sorry, I'm confused by your last messages there, Thornall. But it's been a while since I read like the Highland stuff, so I don't remember character names, is what I'm saying. But yeah, I feel like Heinlein is interesting in that he is clearly like a libertarian, but he's also like a libertarian, like living through the 40s and so forth. So he's like, I'm a libertarian, but Nazis are bad. And I need to kind of square that. And that's something that like contemporary libertarians kind of don't have to go like, hey, I'm a libertarian and being Nazi is totally cool with libertarians kind of thing. Not all libertarians, I know, but there's a lot of like weird alliances that if you take like actual libertarian philosophy seriously, you should probably not do. And Heinlein is interesting to me because he is clearly in that area and in that time where he clearly believes in like a libertarian philosophy and stuff. But he also goes like, yeah, libertarian means you're not a Nazi, you're not a fascist. And that makes him sort of like feeling like almost like fallen out of time today because of like how the kind of philosophy that he was a part of and how that has sort of like shifted positions in like the political system because they still sort of like use like similar like signifiers and stuff, and but they have changed since then. And that's fascinating for me with like Thornall with what's his face, Heinlein. Oh, yeah. But yeah, no, All Quiet on the Western Front is not an easy read. It is, however, an excellent book. Like, you read that, and I read it in like German, in like the original, but like, holy shit, that is, you know, there's reasons why that thing was like banned by the Nazis. There's reasons why the like 1930s movie was not exactly popular in Germany at the time. Which like, I mean, yes, the new like movie version I think is pretty good, but like watch like the old black and white All Quiet on the Western Front, and that's like without like having like all the like insanely good graphic violence stuff of like the war scenes. That is one hell of a depressing movie. Like seriously, I feel like more people need to actually read that book or watch that movie because it's written by someone who went through the whole thing and goes like, hey, here's how that actually is. It kind of sucks. I think in that regard, it is very similar to something like the things they carried, just like for World War One, which very different war, different approach to war, but like, yeah, I wish more people would actually read that. Why I mean not, yeah, yeah, but like it's been a while since I read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and I did really enjoy it at the time, so there's that. I should probably reread it. Once I keep, continuing with the Ian McDonald stuff because, I think the next one oh yeah, the next one I need to read is the sequel to Chaga, but after that it's River of Gods, and then it's Luna, and Luna is Ian McDonald, you know, deconstructing Moon as a harsh mistress. So it might be a clever idea to also reread Moon as a Harsh Mistress before I read Luna, I think. German history sucks. It's boring. It's not good. I cannot recommend reading German history. And I'm saying this as someone who's studied history in Marburg, and our main professor for like early 20th century history is Eckhard Konze, and he's like the guy when it comes to like how the Nazis became Nazis kind of thing. He's like internationally the number one guy to actually do any research on that stuff. Like he's the number one guy, and that's where I started like you know where I took lectures on like 20th century history in Germany. I still find it kind of boring, but that's me because you know not my century, not my kind of thing. I'm not very smart. I'm just like someone who has read a lot of books and is able to quote them. That's all I can do. I'm not a very smart person. Anyway, um, I was going to go somewhere with this, and then my brain fogged, which happens way too often. Oh, there's going to be a video tomorrow. It's going to be interesting. I get very angry at one of YouTube's biggest science communicators. Professor Dave Explains made a video about artificial intelligence, and I had criticisms of that video, and then he just he replied to it immediately and called me Sam Altman's sock account, which interesting, and told me to go fuck myself. And now I'm really angry at him, which is frustrating because like I thought we were on the same side. I just want him to actually do better, and he did not with his like artificial intelligence video. So there is going to be a video that's going to be slightly different from what I usually do, but I'm going to be very angry. Like I recorded it once, and then I realized that I left out some stuff, and today I was too tired to actually re-record that because as I said, like went to a punk rock concert on Thursday and then was day drinking until like early today. So I'm not in a position where I could, record that kind of video. But I hope I'll have that up tomorrow because it's not the kind of thing I wanted to do, but it just like really pissed me off so much. I feel like academia is like a weird thing though, because like yes, and that's partly because of like the way we've like subjugated academia under like a specific sort of like capitalist sort of like paradigm. Go like you need to hit specific numbers and shit to actually get funding and so forth, and that goes against like how academia actually works, because what you want with academia is like the kind of thing that you have like with like the computer lab in at MIT, where it's like we'll just like, give you a bunch of money and let you guys like just like do stuff for like a while, and something cool will come out because we know you know you're interested in shit, you'll do interesting shit, something will come out, and we've kind of lost that, and like sort of like forcing academia into a results oriented sort of like framework is bad, because that's not how like that's not how academia works. That's not like how research works. And like, and I'm already struggling with like the term research, because research is already like science oriented, and it's like you're in the humanities, you do like history, you study history or political science or philosophy or whatever. That stuff is somewhat different from like what we understand when, like what we mean when when we talk about like research, because research in philosophy is yeah, you go and read like a bunch of like old books and then you form your own opinion. But the research is that's not what we think we mean when we say research, because what we think when we say research is like we go like, yeah, that is I do say some experiments, and then I get like final, like definite answers that are, verifiable and stuff. And that's just like not how history or like philosophy works. It's like just like not how that works. But we need that part so badly. And we should actually, probably give like more money to those aspects of like the humanities to actually have that as well, because it does sort of like build a specific aspect of society that helps to correct sort of like mistakes over time and does all this other stuff. Plus, it's also just like really cool. But you know, I think there's a need for that that kind of gets lost. All right, I don't know that study, but I know. I feel like I've learned a lot from like both like studying like in philosophy and history. I've learned a lot of like really interesting stuff that has helped me with like all kinds of other stuff outside of that. And I'm not saying like, studying computer science didn't also, help me. It did, like very much in all kinds of ways. And if it's only that I'm actually able, to read like science papers and go like, yeah, I get what you're doing. I may not understand the actual details, but I can, judge stuff. Hey, look, this is like a live stream where everyone can rant. So if you want to rant, Thornall, you can rant. That's what we're doing around here. But yeah, so now I'm gonna I'm gonna go and read some sort of weird stuff and like finish recording the AI video. But I'm gonna make that video because I fuck Professor Dave for calling me like Sam Altman's sock account. I mean, come on, motherfucker! Like, like there's a lot of things you can call me, but like Sam Altman, really? I felt personally offended by that because my issue was that he was not going hard enough, and he kind of misread that and goes like, "Ah, clearly you didn't watch my video because you posted this like half an hour after I published it, and the video is like 40 minutes ago. So clearly you didn't watch the video." I was like, "Well, there is a speed up function, you know." Um, Also, yeah, me telling you that focusing on super intelligence is maybe not the thing that AI research needs to worry about right now is definitely me being like Sam Altman's. I wish I was Sam Altman because then I would actually have money and would not live under my fucking bed. But we're not, and so I'm gonna pull that one out and yell about that before the AI video is actually finished because it takes so much time to actually do that thing. Thurnol, if you are into Redwall and if you don't dislike heavy metal, the amazing band Mega Colossus, used to be called Colossus, have a song called Salamandastron, which is a song about Redwall, and it's a heavy metal song about Redwall. And Salamandastron is the mountain where the Badger Lords keep away the pirates. It's the fire. The fire. It's like a dead volcano where like badgers forge magical swords, which is really cool. So I understand why they made a song about it, but so I'm saying like there's like there's a power metal song about Redwall that is called Salamandastron. There is like an old like cartoon series of Redwall, and I think Netflix like licensed Redwall to do like a new Redwall series. But I don't know if anything has come of that yet. But like there's like an old like 90s Redwall cartoon series that I don't know how good it is now, how close it is to the books, but like Clooney the Scourge is like yeah, it is so fucking good. You have like the rat with an eye patch and like a poison spike on its tail on like a cart, and this like lieutenant falls over and gets run over by the cart, and he's like, "Tell the devil that Clooney sent you." And I'm like, this is like so like in your face, explicit kind of cool or cringe, depending on like which side you're looking at it. But and that's kind of what makes like Redwall. I mean, Redwall is like nuanced beyond that, but like that is just like so much fun. Oh, yeah, the Asmodeus, the poison teeth, the snake, right, right. He shows up in the Asmodeus shows up in the first book as well when what's his face goes to actually find Martin the Warrior's sword, which has been taken away. And I keep forgetting his name, but yeah, yeah, because like the sword ends up in like Asmodeus poison thief's lair, and he has it to find the sword again, to bring back the sword, and then you know defeat Clooney the Scourge and his hordes from besieging Redwall Abbey. No, it's like it's just like a really 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 good story, and it would work just as well if everyone were like humans, but they're like all animals, furry animals, and doesn't matter that much really. But I've learned more things about rodents through through Redwall than I ever did before, because like, and that's like one of those things like um the way I learned like stuff about like trees from reading Lord of the Rings, now I learned about rodents from reading Redwall, because how you have like specific like words for specific trees, and specific words for specific different like forms of rodents, like like different forms of mice, right? Like you have like your field mouse and your vole, and now I know those words like vole and shrew and all those other. In German, there are all like something something mouse, right? Like the Feldmaus and Wühlmaus and all these other. So vole is like Wühlmaus, and shrew is Spitzmaus. But you have like all these different like terms. You kind of know them, but you never actually pay attention to them, because why would you? And then you read a book, and suddenly it kind of becomes really important, and suddenly you actually know sort of like the difference between between those like rodents and stuff. And like the same was for like when I was like reading Lord of the Rings, and you read the Two Towers, and you have like the whole like end section, suddenly you learn about like all those trees, and I'm like, yes, I have all these like German words, but like was like an oak versus a beech versus a fucking maple versus all these other fucking tree names stuff. but you never think about that. And then you read something like Lord of the Rings, like Two Towers, and you have like all the different ends that look like different trees, and suddenly like you're kind of forced to actually understand that, you know, trees are not just trees. There's like different trees, and it kind of forces you to actually sort of like differentiate stuff that's so easy to just like kind of mush together into like one thing. I I feel. Um, in German, just like it's just like Batman. That one just stays English. So yeah, I don't know though. No, Batman is just Batman. Uh, but yeah, but I feel that that's sort of like how like a specific kind of book kind of forces you to reckon with the fact that something that we often sort of like group together with like, yeah, this is just like small furry animals, and then you never think about that again. Or it's like, yeah, these are trees, and I can just like barely differentiate between, you know, coniferous trees and whatever the stuff with like leaves is called. Which already tells you how much I know about trees, right? Like it's like you got trees with needles and trees with like leaves, and that's it. And then you realize that actually no, there's like you know, stuff that you might want to, you know, look into. Hey, Konstantinos, how are you doing? Konstantinos. So yeah, I think that's sort of like where what I what I learned from Redwall was like all the different like terms about like different rodents, and now I know what a shrew is, and now I know what a vole is, now I know what a mouse is, like a field mouse is, and all the other stuff. But shrews are the coolest because they're like, you know, anarchists, I guess. And who doesn't like, you know, guerrilla shrews? Or that, or that Thornall. But as I said, like after reading Redwall, for me, shrews are, you know, a self-organized group of anarchist pirates that fight for well, freedom of expression and personal liberty and stuff, and just take down everyone who's against that. So I'll take that one. I think it's definitely the better thing. But yeah, but yeah, right. Like Vole is like depending on where you are and who how you live and so forth. It's like, why would you actually know that, right? Like it has become specialized knowledge to understand like what a vole is. It's like unless you actually, you know, live in the privileged situation where you have like an actual garden and you have to deal with voles, or you know, yeah, there's like how the fuck would you know? It's like, yeah, they're kind of mice. They dig, and that's it. They're like the dwarves of in mouse society. Voles are like dwarves, I guess, sort of. But all of them have beards, so who knows? Now that said that, I'm like, so voles have like big helmets and wear chainmail, which they don't, but that's a very I like Thornhill. I have no idea. Like seriously, I like no, I don't know. Um, so I think it kind of depends, right? Like because like a lot of like when I was a kid was either reading books or doing stuff that uh, well, my mother kind of forced me into. Wrong, right? But like my parents like divorced like when I was like 4 years old, so that's that. I did like a lot of like, stuff, sports sports stuff as a kid. So a lot of like my life was like as a young kid was like, hey, and now you got to go to gymnastics or rowing or stuff like that. So I don't know if that would have changed if I had internet. So good question. And just to be clear, I'm thankful I did all of that because you know having had like about like 10 years of fucking like gymnastics as a kid is something that I very much like benefit from today when it comes to doing dumb shit and falling down and shit like having like a level of like control over my body that has is sort of like so fucking deeply ingrained. So I don't know if like having would if like access to the internet would have changed that much because a lot of it was like still like sort of like external control, like basically where I did not have that much of a choice. I think, which yeah, is good or bad. Hey Kale, again, how you doing? But I mean, what the fuck? Like, what time is it in Australia for you? Like here, it's like half past midnight, so it must be something like noon-ish, I guess. Weird. I feel like, and and that's like what. So here's the thing: like when it comes to like stuff like internet and things like there's this like concept of like having like the extended mind, right? Like where we sort of like have stuff that is outside of like our body that becomes part of ourselves in like how we interact with it and stuff. And I feel like the internet is very much like an like the kind of thing that kind of ties into that, in how having access to like all kinds of information, right? Like everything, right? Like how we have that with like smartphones and stuff. That has changed how we feel within the world, I think, in a lot of ways. And that has definitely changed since, the 2000s, like early 2000s or like mid 2000s, like probably like before smartphones, I think. Because like even if had internet in like the 90s or early 2000s, like it was still sort of like, that one room where that one computer was that had like internet access. But like smartphones really fucking changed the game in that we suddenly have sort of like access to whatever we want to know right now. And that I think has is like the thing that really changed like sort of like how we interact with the world, and like how we situate ourselves in the world, I think, in ways. And I don't know if we've actually figured out what that actually means. I don't think we have, but it's certainly something that is, yeah, I don't know, difficult, I think. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's Sunday for you. Well, here it is. Yeah, it's 30 something past midnight in Germany. But yeah, like the abundance of like information, like the ability to actually choose, I think is like the big deal. You're right there, Konstantinos. Like yes, you like in the 90s and in 2000s, like I could go to like a record store and pick like albums and stuff, and I can go to like a newspaper store and I can buy like a heavy metal magazine or like a like whatever, like tip thematical sort of like magazine. But there's always like a someone is making choices for me kind of thing. And that filter has kind of dropped away with or not dropped away, but like changed. Like I'm trying to remember a word, and I'm dumb and drunk and stupid, and I can't remember the word. But like, um, but here's the thing: like, what we did have is that someone was, making choices of like what to present and what to send along and so forth, and that what was humans actually doing that. And that has kind of gone, and we've kind of left sort of like move that over to like algorithms go like everyone can put their like art and ideas and shit online, and machines will sort it all out. And I think that is dangerous because on the one hand, machines are not actually neutral, because machines are built by humans, and all kinds of prejudice are like built into that stuff. But it's also where I'm, when I go to like a concert, I don't know, I know like one guy has figured this shit out, or like has decided which bands to play. And it's like, yeah, so if I don't like what they're doing, I'm tying that to that one person. But if like by tying the whole thing to sort of like machines, you take away that level of responsibility and go like, no, this is just like, that's algorithms. They're neutral, I guess, which they're not, because nothing is ever fucking neutral. Because like as long as humans create algorithms will be, you know, stuff. By which I mean, biased. Yeah, and nowadays you're like Bart Simpson is probably like one of the healthiest, one of the healthiest like role models you can have. But yeah, but yeah, like I said, like the idea of like extended mind theory, like in philosophy, is just like one of those like things that sounds like stupid, and then you think about it, and suddenly it makes sense because what you do is like if I write down stuff in like a diary, and I always have that diary, and I always have like access to that diary. I'm kind of treating that diary as sort of like an extension of my mind, of my memory and stuff, because it's like I know where I put it. I can remember it by opening the book and stuff. And as long as you sort of like extend your mind into those sort of like closed places, like diaries and shit like that, that's one thing. But like once you use like smartphones, and that's like the dangerous part, right? Like it's like you have a smartphone, you have access to the internet, you can always use, I don't know, just like Wikipedia, right? You can always look up everything. Suddenly, like the way you interact with like the stuff versus the stuff you need to look up, that border gets blurry as fuck. And 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 that does come with like consequences, because on the one hand, yeah, of course it's cool if you can actually figure out everything immediately. That is objectively really good. But when it comes to sort of like how you think of yourself, the idea of like, hey, I'm the person that knows these things, is like part of like how you think of yourself. And once like that sort of like thing breaks away, because suddenly being a person who knows these things is no longer a big deal, because like everything is sort of like available immediately. That does change like the your self image in ways. And I don't know if we've ever actually thought about this enough. I I think. And yeah, just to be clear, like I'm not saying like it's bad that we have all of this. I think it's good. I think we just need to actually be aware of like how that it does sort of like affect our like self image and like how we relate to the world, and that is something that kind of gets lost because there's that focus on like the mechanical aspects of like what technology does, and that is you know not enough. Yeah, yeah. That's what it's like not being able to look up stuff, and like versus like people who grew up with like no, you can't look up stuff all the time, and that and that's kind of like what I was trying to say, right? Like it's like you create this sort of like this idea of like the self versus like the rest of the world. It's like here's shit I know, and there's stuff I could potentially know by looking it up, and I know how to look it up. But that's a different thing from like myself. And once you have that situation where I can like look up everything just by looking at my phone, that that aspect of like sort of like delineating the self kind of falls away. And no matter what you think about that, I'm not going to. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying like we need to talk about like what that does to sort of like the idea of the self. If those sort of like you know things we use to delineate the self kind of fall away, and we need to think about that because like the idea of like having a self, having like a self, having like a personal identity, that is still like that's core to like the human experience. So we should probably pay attention to like how we define that shit, I guess. Maybe. Who knows? Yeah, that's the point. It's getting blurry, and the fact that it is getting blurry is like worrying. In that we should at least talk about like what that does to us. You know what I mean? Like, like obviously, it's not like we can't change. We can't change that, and I don't want to change that. But like, we should probably like think about it and talk about it at some point. I think, and there is that's like one of those like things that I'm like often frustrated with is like this idea of like yeah well that's just like progress, so we have to live with that. It's like no, we don't. First of all, we don't have to live with progress because progress is still something that like humans decide to do. And even if shit happens, we should still talk about like what that actually does to us because you know we're still the people being affected by it, so we should probably at least you know talk about it. And that's sort of like turning like progress, turning like mechanical progress, turning that into like a force of nature and going like yeah this is not worth talking about, that I think is dangerous. And that ties into that larger sort of like the way we deal with like the natural sciences and use them as like something that is like a force of nature that you can't actually actually interact with. And I'm like no, of course you can. And we should. It doesn't invalidate anything. That's but we should still be aware of the fact that like we're still humans that shape our world. It's like one of those things like that David Graeber quote, no. um and we're going to end this now ish because it's I'm doing this for like almost 4 hours now, and I'm getting tired and stuff. It's like 1 a.m. almost. And but like David Graeber said, like the secret, the secret truth of the universe is that we made it up ourselves, and we can always change it. And that is that is kind of the thing, right? Like you need to understand, and we need to understand that like very few things are like literally, fundamental like things we can't change. I mean, obviously, physical constants, but that's about it. Everything else is something we as humans created. We can change that. And if we decide that something sucks, we should actually go and change that. And the idea of going like, no, this is just like a rule. It's like, no, no, it's not. Like beyond, like fucking gravity and shit. Very few things are actual rules. And that is so fucking empowering. And I think we should like, you know, keep that in mind and stick to that and be willing to actually, you know, try shit. We'll fail. We'll absolutely fuck up all the fucking time, but we might actually, figure out cool things that, you know, might be, worth doing in the future. Because clearly, like, the stuff they're doing right now is not actually, it's not working for everyone, is it? And I think that is sort of like the important part is like, hey, to understand that like almost nothing is actually set in stone because most of it is just like conventions that we kind of adhere to and be willing to actually break that shit is yeah, it's something we can all benefit from. Yes, you're right there. Like it does sort of like regress us. You're right. It kind of if you're using like mathematics, it feels like we're sort of like falling into like a local like minimum basically, right? And we kind of end up in that one weird place and then we can't get out of that. And that is absolutely fucking frustrating. And I don't know what to do about that. But I think it's important to understand that that happens and that we need to fight against that because it's certainly something that happened with cable TV. It happened with like it happens every single fucking time, and just because it happens doesn't mean that's inevitable. It just means that we need to be aware of it and do something around that. But yeah, anyway, thanks everyone actually for hanging out and Konstantinos. Glad you actually joined us. That was really cool. Um, uh, oh, I don't know what'll happen next. Certainly we'll do something at the end of September. Probably not the last weekend of September because I'll be helping friends at a festival on the last weekend of September. So probably the weekend before. Anyway, something will happen, is what I'm saying. I'll do some videos until then, and I'll also try to have like a guest for the next time round because it's been a while since I have a guests, and I usually I like to have like guests from time to time to have people with like very very different ideas from me to actually talk about stuff. We'll see. Point is, I'll do something. Thanks for actually hanging out. I'll finish this beer and I'll get some sleep finally after days and days and days of punk rock, which you should also listen to in general. Like I don't know, listen to some NoFX, listen to some Bad Religion, listen to some Pennywise, listen to a lot of propaganda and other stuff. And I don't know. I'll see you very soon. Until then. I'll try to find out how to actually end that stream. Which is not as easy as you might think, but yeah. You know, it's funny. I'm trying to actually end the stream and it's so difficult. Ah, here we go. Finally. Well, I am sure to end the stream. Thanks for actually hanging out. I really, really, really appreciate it a lot. I'll see you around. Thanks so much.